Hello everybody, this is Kai Marin, and got some unfortunate news today. Itch.io has effectively banned all NSFW content from their platform. And just for the uninitiated, Itch.io, it was pretty much just a marketplace for indie games, and it was very free, And they had quite a few NSFW games on there, although recently they've effectively banned everything. Alright, so let's just read through this, and this will sound familiar if you were keeping track of the Steam situation too. So, as you can see, we have de-indexed all adult NSFW content from our browse and search pages. We understand this action is sudden and disruptive, and we are truly sorry for the frustration and confusion caused by this change. Recently, we came under scrutiny from our payment processors regarding the nature of some content hosted on itch.io due to a game titled No Mercy, which was temporarily available on itch.io before being banned back in April. The organization Collective Shout launched a campaign against Steam and itch.io, directing concerns to our payment processor about the nature of certain content found on both platforms. So they were effectively strong-armed into this by the payment processors at the behest of this Collective Shout organization, which, for the uninitiated, is basically, they're a Australian feminist organization. As you can see here, since our launch in 2010, we have achieved many wins. Billboards objectifying women pulled down, sexualized children's clothing withdrawn from sale, sexually violent games banned, Andrew Tate's pimping courses removed from Spotify, whatever. They seemed pretty, they didn't seem that big. They seemed kind of, small potatoes. I mean, removing some local billboards isn't exactly that crazy. Although this part's interesting. Sexualized children's clothing withdrawn from sale. That's very interesting considering this is the group which defended Cuties. As you can see, Cuties, an ethically problematic but powerful protest against the sexualization of girls. If you don't remember, Cuties was this Netflix movie, which was effectively softcore CP. And look, you could say whatever you want about the story of the movie, right? It doesn't change the fact that this was a movie that unequivocally sexualized young girls. Alright, here it is, movie literally sexualizing real 11-year-old girls. Alright, so it's very interesting how they sort of bring that up. But anyways, let's go over here. This was a few days ago, right? But they have also affected Steam as well. Win. New policy on Steam and rape plus incest games removed. A major win for women and girls. Following our successful campaign and 70,000 partition to get rape simulation game No Mercy pulled from gaming platform Steam, we discovered almost 500 other games depicting rape, incest, sexual torture, and child abuse. By the way, I call bullshit on the child abuse because Steam already bans that. And also rape. I'm going to say this, women are way more into rape than men are. Honestly, people shit on gooners all the time. Goonettes are 10 times worse. The most degenerate shit that gooners will fap to is entry level for goonettes. I mean, let's not forget, Barnes & Noble added a monster fucker section. This is real, by the way. Women are buying this. My God. But anyways, though, where was it? Oh yeah, we encourage our supporters to email payment processors and call them to stop facilitating payments and profiting from these games on Steam, and 1,067 did. This week, we released an open letter signed by leading global anti-sexploitation organizations and individuals to senior executives at payment gateway companies, including MasterCard, Visa, and PayPal. Within just a few days, we've seen significant action. As a result of our campaign, Steam's introduced a new rule to their policies and removed hundreds of rape and incest games. The new rule states content that may violate the rules and standards set forth by Steam's payment processors and related card networks and banks, or internet network providers, in particular certain kinds of adult-only content. Now, I know what you might be thinking. I don't freaking care about Sex Village, or Slave of the Police Officer, or Interactive Daughters BDSM, Incest Daughters BDSM Episode 1, and look, that's a fair point. I don't care about this content myself either. However, it sets a very dangerous precedent, because what's effectively happened here is a radical feminist organization saw something they didn't like and then got payment processors to strong-arm Steam into removing that content. You know, so effectively what we have is radical feminists deciding, using payment processors as their muscle, they are dictating what you can and can't purchase, the games you can or cannot buy on Steam, on itch.io. And look, this is a big problem because, look, they're just going after this extreme stuff, rape, incest games. All right, this is just their first target. But look, they'll go a lot farther than this, Next is, we go back here. I hate to bring up some ancient history, but I do think it's important. Anita Sarkeesian was basically the first, stormtrooper of wokeness. And this is one of her more infamous quotes.
Everything is sexist, everything is racist, everything is homophobic, and you have to point it all out.
And look, basically what she's saying there is that everything to these kinds of people is problematic. All right, today it's whatever, garbage porn games no one cares about. Next, it's going to be any kind of NSFW content, okay? Download Honey Pop while you can. After that, they're going to move on to just stuff that's sexually suggestive, like Stellar Blade, Nier Automata. After that, it's going to be everything else. When these people literally do see almost everything is problematic. They want it all gone. They want it all censored. They want it all restricted. I don't have the tweets, but they have even gone after games like Detroit Become Human and Grand Theft Auto. And ultimately, the thing is that there's nothing that Steam or itch.io can actually do in response. If you want to cripple somebody, you go after their money. I forget which amendment this is, but this is why, in America at least, people have a right. The government isn't allowed to excessively fine people. People have a right protecting them against that. Because the founding fathers knew that if you could fine somebody excessively, you could take away their money, you can cripple them. It's the same thing here. Because look, there isn't really an alternative to, say, the credit cards. What else are you supposed to do, right? Crypto? Steam actually tried that and it didn't work out, and it's just too obscure anyway. So ultimately, Steam will have to buckle. They'll have to surrender to any and all demands that these payment processors give them. And the payment processors are just doing whatever these feminist groups tell them to do. So Steam is 100% beholden to radical feminists right now. And there isn't really a way to fix that, unfortunately. And, we'll have to see. There is legislation being proposed that will force these payment processors to serve anybody as long as what they're doing is legal. It would be very good if that law was passed, but we'll have to see. But anyways, though, like I said, ultimately, this is the problem. It's really, the slippery slope is real. Today it might just be whatever. Frickin' whatever. Interactive sex, queen, prince, incest, all this, no one cares. I certainly don't, all right? But soon they're going to start coming after games I do care about. I do like Stellar Blade. I do like Nier Automata, whatever, right? So we'll have to see how far this actually goes. And like I said, it sets a really bad precedent. And it sort of ties into sort of greater ideas too. This kind of stuff really bothers me because we live in literally the most sexually degenerate time, maybe in all of history. All right, we're not as bad as the Weimar Republic. At least our peak isn't as bad as the peak of the Weimar Republic. But overall, I'd say it's way worse. And because, think about it this way. We live in a society, that's so... And I mean, hookup culture is sort of the peak of this. Hookup culture is really such a big problem. Promiscuity in general. It's common for women to go to university and, bang 100 guys. It's not really that ridiculous for women to have body counts in the triple digits, And these women, they're celebrated. They're still queens. Oh, but by the way, yeah, that's the whole thing. If you bang hundreds of guys, you're a queen. But if a guy just wants to goon, then he's frickin' enemy number one. And it goes even further, because you're seeing sort of a push against pornography from both the left and the right. And right now it's mostly just minor stuff, but it will expand. I found this article, this was a little bit ago. OnlyFans users face prison under harsh new Swedish prostitution law. And you might say that's based, right? Honestly, if you're using OnlyFans, you should be in prison. But the issue I have with this is that it's just the buyers who are being hurt by this. Only the OnlyFans models, the creators, they get a freaking free pass. But if you are one of the guys that pays for this, then you get thrown in jail. You know what I mean? Like, what the hell? And you even see this from conservatives too. As you can see, Texas Senate passes bill that could criminalize owning anime, manga, and games with lolly characters. You know, there's sort of a push from, like I said, both the left and the right against pornography. You know, there's also, say, the no fat movement. The right, even on the right, there's a growing anti-porn sentiment. Feminists have as you can see, it's the same thing with feminists. As you can see, Collective Shout are getting pornographic games banned from Steam and itch.io. And look, I'll say this. I think in an ideal society, porn should be banned. But the thing is, we're not living in an ideal society, like in our society, like I said, our society is very promiscuous, right? Feminism's completely wrecked everything. And really, porn is kind of the one way men actually can kind of fight back and get some manner of sexual freedom. Because look, you can look into it, like, I have all this shit here. Yeah, like, here's a little fact that people won't talk about, right? Well, people talk about this, but most young men are single, most young women are not. 2/3 of young men are single, only 1/3 of young women are single. How exactly does that happen? Americans are saying no to sex like never before, with young men leading the depressing trend. And the whole thing is that the reason why these trends exist is just because of the state of the current sexual market. We have runaway hypergamy, and we basically have like a soft polygamist society where you have most women chasing a small number of the top men, which is how you get, say, way more young men who are single than young women, because the young women, going for the same kind of guys. And ultimately, though, you see, what kind of leads to is that you have, oh, what the fuck? Whoops. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. Ultimately, this has sort of led to a sort of disenfranchisement of young men, And really, this is all because of feminism, Feminism is what, the sexual revolution opened this all up, and it left most men high and dry. And this sort of disenfranchises young men because, look, young men basically have no future. They can't even get laid, Women do motivate men quite a lot. And ultimately, though, ultimately the ruling class, you're seeing how porn and gaming sapped young men of their desire to work. Young men are playing video games all day instead of getting jobs because they can mooch off of free healthcare, claims congressman. But this isn't really true. They're trying to blame, say, porn for this, when really porn is just a replacement good. I guarantee you, any young man who's using porn, he wouldn't be using it anymore if he had, a satisfying emotional and sexual relationship. But young men just don't have that anymore, and banning porn isn't going to fix the issue. It's not like banning porn is going to increase the number of single women. That's not how it works. But, like I said, the ruling class is going to blame literally is never ever going to actually blame themselves. They're not going to blame feminism for these problems. They're just going to blame young men. They're going to blame men as they always do. And we'll see if they actually go as far as banning porn to try and, get young men back on the plantation, so to speak. We'll have to see. I do think that's a legitimate possibility. Although I do think it will seriously backfire because, porn is probably the one thing that's stopping an incel revolution. Straight up World War III, famine, those are less likely to cause a civil war than banning porn, in my opinion. But anyways, though, we'll have to keep monitoring the situation, how it develops. At the bare minimum, I absolutely do not want feminists, feminist harpies dictating what games I can and can't play. Hopefully we get some kind of solution to this problem. It is a very depressing trend. But anyways, comment down below what you guys think. Like the video if you enjoyed. Subscribe for more content in the future. Thank you guys all for watching, and goodbye.